I will turn it over to Tricia to get things started.
All right. I'll go into the official instructions in a moment, but right now I'm going to do attendance. It is going to be a roll call attendance. So when I say your name, if you're here, if you could just say that you are present, and obviously if we don't hear you, we're going to note that you are absent. Sandra Baines.
Here.
Chadwick Bowman. John Craner.
Here.
James Haltigan. He is absent. Rick Holtz. He indicated he would be absent. Galapa Madhusudan.
I'm here.
Gene Magruder.
Here.
Peter Palmer.
Here.
David Rushton.
Here.
Patrick Studley.
Here.
Paul Thomas. He indicated he would be absent. And Lewis Walker.
Here.
All right. And for staff, we have myself, Joe Howitt, Tanya Pettis, Shannon Webster, and then Counsel Josh Laws. I think that captures everyone.
Are we going straight to the minutes?
Let's see. Next on the, hold on one second.
For public comment?
No, we got to, next are the announcements. All right, hopefully my screen is showing. I'm going to try to not talk while I'm bringing it up because I know it'll interrupt the audio. So in terms of the announcements for the meeting, keep in mind that the meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public. It will be posted on DPOR's YouTube site. In addition, the video for each board member is not required, but certainly we need to be able to hear you. With that being said, if you can mute when you're not speaking, please do that just to help with background noise and for everyone to be able to hear. As we go through, there will be a roll call vote for each motion that's made as part of the agenda. So when we get to your name, please make sure you say for out loud that, you know, either you are in favor of the motion or not in favor of the motion so that we can capture that again for each vote as we go through the board meeting. So it will make it a little bit longer in terms of having to go through that process as we go through the meeting. If we have a broadcast interruption, certainly if the public at any time loses the ability to see the meeting, not because of their personal connection issues, but because of a problem with the broadcast, if they could let us know immediately. And Tanya Pettis, her email address is on the slide here. It's tanya.pettis@dpor.virginia.gov. And I think she's also going to put it in the chat for reference. So please make sure if you lose connection to the meeting, then let us know so that we can immediately stop the meeting because we can't move forward until we restore the connection and the public can observe the meeting. The last thing is I've heard it may be helpful to turn on closed captioning if, you know, there are times that you're having trouble, which reminds me, I'm going to turn it on, even though I'm not sure if it'll show up on the meeting recording, but we'll do it anyway. So I believe that covers everything. And I see our director has joined us as well. So good morning. All right, Mr. Chairman, that is all I have in terms of the announcements. If you want to move into the motion for the agenda.
We need a motion to move the agenda for today.
I make a motion to approve the agenda for today.
Patrick made the motion. Is there a second?
There's a second, Dave.
Been moved and seconded, or do you need a roll call on this, Trish?
Yes, sir. I'm going to do that now. Sandra Baines.
Yes.
John Craner.
Yes.
Galapa Madhusudan,
Yes.
Jean Magruder,
Yes.
Peter Palmer,
His mic's up. Autumn.
Yes.
perfect. Dave Rushton,
Yes.
Patrick Studley,
Aye.
and Lewis Walker.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So that is all in favor of that.
Now we move into minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
We need a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, if you want to have the motion, take the two sets of minutes in a block. There are the
I make a
November.
motion, we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Are you talking? You talking
I'm
two?
trying.
Two meetings, Trish?
Yes, on the agenda, there are the board meeting minutes from November 5th, as well as the committee meeting minutes from the November 10th Regulatory Review Committee.
Is there a motion to approve both meetings, the regulatory review and the regular minutes?
So moved.
moved. Dave.
Peter's moved. Is there a second? A second?
I'll second that.
Call for the vote.
All right, roll call again. Sandra Baines,
Yes.
John Craner,
Yes.
Galapa Madhusudan,
Yes.
Jean Magruder,
Yes.
Peter Palmer,
Yes.
Dave Rushton,
Yes.
Patrick Studley,
Yes.
and Lewis Walker.
Yes.
All right, thank you for that.
Now public comment period.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that anyone is here, but I will say that as usual, comments are limited to 5 minutes. We would ask that the commenter enter their name and affiliation, if applicable, into the chat feature, just so we can make sure to properly record it for the minutes. And of course, after public comment, just like at a usual meeting, we will ask that you mute so as not to interrupt the rest of the proceedings, just to make sure there are no members of the public to speak.
You see nobody here to speak public comment, right? Now we will move into the case files. Turn it over to administration.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Joe Howitt. The first case on your agenda, well, before we go further, we have two different types of cases today. We have a series of informal fact-finding conference cases, and we also have a consent order. They're all home inspector cases. For the first two cases, we're going to need both Mr. Craner and Mr. Rushton to recuse themselves because they participated or were involved with those cases.
And so for recusing, if you could just mute and turn off your video until we get through those two items, or those items.
All right. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, on page 14 of the electronic agenda, we have the first case on the docket today, and that is Matthew Joseph Setter. The file number is 2020-530. This case was originally a consent order that was brought to the board at its November meeting last year. Mr. Setter appeared at that board meeting and asked for an IFF to be convened in the case, and that is why this case is before you here today. Mr. Craner presided over the informal fact-finding conference and has placed before you the recommendation that he believes the board should consider and adopt. The respondent in the case was, there are two counts in the case. The respondent was charged with failure to have his contract meet the minimum requirements of the board's regulations, and then also the inspection report prepared by Mr. Setter also failed to meet the minimum requirements of the board's regulations. The board member is recommending a total monetary penalties of $300. Before we go further on this, since this is an informal fact-finding conference case, Mr. Chairman, the board will need to have 2 votes on this case. The first vote would be to accept the recommendation for violations. Then the second vote would need to be for accepting the recommended penalties. So at the board's pleasure, Mr. Chairman, if anyone wants to make a motion regarding the adoption or accepting of the violations that are recommended.
I will accept an entertainment on a motion to accept recommendations on violations.
I move that we accept the motion, the recommendations by the administration.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, one thing I want to know is, I do see that Donofrio, which is a company which gave him the forms, so are they not equally responsible in a way that they're giving the same forms, which doesn't meet the board regulations? So do we have anything that we need to be guiding them or talking to the company as well? Because there'll be several other inspectors going on their behalf and using the same wrong forms, because at some point, I do see Mr. Setter saying that he was given the wrong forms, but that doesn't make him recluse him from the mistake he made. But I still feel that Donofrio is equally responsible if they're not giving the right forms either. So it's just my thought.
May I weigh in?
Sandra?
That was a discussion that we've had several times with regard to this particular organization. And most recently, we discussed the issue of the contracts at our meeting yesterday. I believe once Trish or Dave shares the outcome of our meeting, it'll be a little more clear why we're not in a position to do so. But the upshot was, it's because that's one of my main concerns, and what was told to me is that while we can't, as a board, hold a company, an entity responsible for their forms, our authority lies with each inspector that's required by the code to complete the form in a certain way. Now, Trish, Dave, and even maybe even Peter, our most recent chair, may recall some of that discussion. But that's as I recall it. That's why we cannot hold the company responsible, because the code only allows us to hold the individual licensed inspector responsible.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is a correct statement, but in spite of that, just to avoid future problems, we can't hold them guilty at this point, like you said, but we still need to kind of bring to their, I think probably they know by now, but still need to be like a warning thing for them that, this might be an ongoing thing with other companies too, since because it came up now, we know, but we don't know. There might be other problems where other people are facing because they're giving the same wrong forms to others too, along the path. So it might be just more of a bring them to the notice that they need to update themselves about the forms they're using. It's not to hold them responsible at this point, but still be able to let them know of their mistakes as well.
Well, I think in the case of this particular company, I personally know that they're aware that they have violations and have violated, or they're sending people out with incorrect forms. So in this particular company, I know that many times they are aware of what they're doing.
And just for it does state in the record that during the IFF, the respondent was actually provided with a copy of the applicable regulations. So in terms of, well, it's kind of outside an education perspective, they have been provided with the information.
That's good. That's good.
But as a difference between the asbestos industry and the home inspecting industry, so there's an asbestos license that a contractor has to have, and then his employees are also licensed. So is that the same thing that's applicable for home inspectors? Is the home inspection, the parent company, they don't have to have a license, do they?
That's correct, Mr. Palmer. The only regulated entity when it comes to home inspectors is the individual home inspector, because the way it's laid out in the code, which is different, as you noted, for asbestos and lead, which specifically says that we will also license contractors, and then it also falls under the board for contractors because of the nature of the work they're doing.
So it's not a possibility for the home inspecting parent company to become licensed?
Not under the current legislative framework. It would require a change to the statute.
Right. Okay.
That was going to be my question. That would be a long-term resolution to this issue that's come up a couple of times now.
Think about it.
My recollection, these companies, can be brought before the board of contractors, even if they're in they Trish. I mean, even if it covers lead, asbestos, and home inspection, if it's a corporation defrauds the public.
No, not for home inspectors. The nature of their work as a home inspector, not count any other business they may be engaged in, as a home inspector does not fall under the regulatory framework of the board for contractors as needing a contractor's license. So unlike with asbestos and lead contractors where they're doing repairs and improvements and all of that, that does fall under contractor licensing. Home inspectors who are doing just a visual inspection, they aren't, repairing anything. They aren't in there doing that type of work. They're just reporting on what they're seeing. That doesn't fall into the world of contractor licensing.
So could the city or county take action against the home inspector's business, not the individual?
I guess it would depend on ordinances in the locality, which we don't get into, and they presumably would not do it based on the home inspector regulations.
All right. We call for the vote on violations. Roll call. Tricia.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sandra Baines.
Aye.
John Craner. Oh, I'm sorry. Gulab Madhusudan.
Yes.
Jean Magruder.
Yes.
Peter Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Rushton is recused. Patrick Studley.
Aye.
And Lewis Walker.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, the board will need to address the vote separately now on whether or not to accept the recommended sanctions in the IFF summary.
I will take a motion to accept the penalties.
Motion.
I move that we accept the sanctions.
Second.
I second it.
Any discussion? Boy, our penalties are low compared to board of contractors. I hate to say it, but All right, call for the vote, Tricia.
All right. Sandra Baines.
Aye.
John Craner is recused. Gulab Madhusudan.
Yes.
Jean Magruder.
Yes.
Peter Palmer.
Yes.
Dave Rushton. Out.
I'm recused.
Recluse.
Patrick Studley.
Aye.
Lewis Walker.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay, David, and y'all can come back in.
Actually,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, both Mr. Craner and Mr. Rushton need to be out for the next case. So I apologize. Well, just in a couple more minutes longer here. The next case on your agenda begins at page 228, and the respondent is Frederick P. Reed. File number is 2020-923. I don't believe Mr. Reed has contacted the board to advise as to whether or not he was going to appear. But if Mr. Reed, if you are in fact here, could you indicate in the chat box that you are here, and we can give you an opportunity to comment. All right. Doesn't appear that Mr. Reed is here, Mr. Chairman. So this case was an informal fact-finding conference heard by Mr. Craner. The sole count in the case is failure of the home inspector to have a written contract signed by both parties to the transaction. The presiding officer at the IFF is recommending a $250 dollar monetary penalty be imposed for that violation. As with the previous case, since this was an IFF conference, we're going to need to have 2 votes. The first vote being on violations, and the second vote being on whether or not to accept the recommended sanction.
Is there a motion to approve the violations part of the IFF?
I move we accept the violations.
Been moved by Peter Palmer. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved in second. Any discussion? If no discussion, we'll call for the roll call.
Sandra Baines,
Aye.
Galapa Marusadin,
Yes.
Jean Magruder,
Yes.
Peter Palmer,
Aye.
Dave Rushton is recused, Patrick Studley,
Aye.
Lewis Walker,
Aye.
and the motion passes.
All right. Now, Mr. Chairman, we would need the board to vote separately on whether or not to accept the recommended sanction in the case. But before we do that, I need to inform the board that Mr. Reed has a prior violation of the board's regulations, or a prior case in which he was found to have violated the board's regulations. So if you'll bear with me one second. On August 23rd, 2011, the board entered a final opinion and order in file number 2011-2412 involving Frederick P. Reed. The board found Mr. Reed in violation of the board's regulations. The board found Mr. Reed violated Section 18 VAC 15-40-120.A for failure to ensure both parties signed a legible written contract clearly specifying the terms, conditions, limitations, and exclusions of the work to be performed. The second violation in the case was for 18 VAC 15-190. 15-40-190.6 for failing as a certificate holder in such a manner as to safeguard the interests of the public. Mr. Reed rendered an opinion regarding the condition of EIFS without the necessary qualifications and failed to identify in his report that the EIFS be evaluated by a qualified inspector. The third charge in that previous case, Mr. Chairman, was a violation of 18 VAC 15-40-190.2 for performing repairs as a result of the finding of his certified home inspection. In that case, Mr. Chairman, the board imposed the monetary penalties totaling $2,350. The board further placed Mr. Reed's license on probation. As a condition of probation, Mr. Reed was required to submit evidence acceptable to the board that he successfully completed a minimum of 8 hours of education pertaining to the EIFS within 6 months of the effective date of the order. According to the board's records, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Reed successfully complied with the terms of the board's order on March 22nd, 2012.
Thank you, Joseph.
And just to restate, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation in this case for the IFF summary is a monetary penalty of $250.
Thank you. Is there a motion to accept the sanctions?
I move to accept the distinctions.
Peter Palmer's moved to accept the sanctions. Is there a second?
I second it.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Being no discussion, we'll have a roll call on the vote.
Sandra Baines,
Aye.
Galapa Marusadin,
Yes.
Jean Magruder,
Yes.
Peter Palmer,
Yes.
Patrick Studley,
Aye.
Lewis Walker.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this point, Mr. Rushton can rejoin the meeting. He does not need to be recused on either this next case or the one after it. Mr. Craner will still need to be recused. All right. It looks like Mr. Rushton's back. So, Mr. Chairman, moving to page 334 of your agenda, we have a second case involving Frederick Reed. The file number is 2020-1303. Again, it doesn't look like we have Mr. Reed here, and he never indicated that he was going to attend or participate in the board meeting. But if he is here, we'd ask that he just enter his name and announce his presence, and then we can give him an opportunity to respond to the IFF summary. Okay. Doesn't look like it, Mr. Chairman. So the case before you was an IFF conference presided over by Mr. Craner and alleged several violations of the board's regulations. The first, count one, charges that Mr. Reed failed to use a written contract signed by all the parties in the transaction. Count number two charges that the contract used by Mr. Reed failed to meet the minimum requirements of the board's regulation. Count number three charges that Mr. Reed's inspection report did not indicate the time at which the inspection was concluded. And count number four charges that the inspection report didn't provide an adequate description of the plastic pipes that were part of the plumbing at this property that was inspected. And then count number five charges failure to act as a licensee in a matter to safeguard the interest of the public. So those are the five charges in the case. The presiding officer is recommending monetary penalties totaling $2,000. In addition, the presiding officer is recommending that the license, for count five in this case, recommending that the license be suspended for 6 months from the date of the board's final order, and that at the conclusion of that 6-month period, that Mr. Reed's license be placed on probation for an additional 1 year. If during the time Mr. Reed is during the time of the probation, if Mr. Reed is found in any violation of the board's regulations, Mr. Reed's license would be revoked by the board. In addition, during that probation, within 6 months of the effective date of the order, Mr. Reed would be required to provide evidence acceptable to the board that he has attended and successfully completed a minimum of 9 hours of education related to the home inspection. The continuing education hours would not count toward satisfaction of any continuing education requirements to renew or reinstate or maintain the license. So again, Mr. Chairman, with that, we would need 2 votes. I do want to note that in prior to this case, prior to this board meeting, in consultation with the department's adjudication staff, we are going to request that if the board elects to accept the recommended sanction in the case, that it amend the time period in the probation for Mr. Reed to complete the continuing education. Currently in the summary, the recommendation is for 6 months. We'd ask that that be amended to be extended to 1 year from the date of the board's final order. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, as I said, we would need 2 votes, the first being on violations and then the second being on sanctions.
So Joseph, you already mentioned the priors, so you have to go over that again?
Do the violation first.
Okay.
We're only focused on the violation.
Okay, Tricia, now they're recommending an amendment to that violation.
Hold off on that part.
Oh, that's under sanctions?
Yes, just hold on.
Okay,
Just do the violation.
All right, thank you. I'll take a motion to accept the recommendations on violations.
So moved. Dave?
Second.
I second it.
Acceptance.
Any discussion? In the discussion, Tricia, please call the roll.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sandra Baines.
Aye.
Mr. Craner is recused. Galapa Madusadan.
Yes.
Jean Magruder.
Yes.
Peter Palmer.
Aye.
David Rushton.
Yes.
Patrick Studley.
Yes.
Lewis Walker.
Aye.
And the motion passes with a majority vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yes, now we'll need the vote on the sanctions. And as I indicated earlier, we are requesting that if the board elects to adopt the recommended sanction, that it amends the requirement under the probation to give Mr. Reed 1 year from the effective date of the order to complete the continuing education, as opposed to the 6 months that are currently reflected in the recommendation. In addition, Mr. Chairman, yes, we do have a prior violation involving Mr. Reed, and I'll briefly, as best I can, go through that again for the benefit of the board in this case. So, in August of 2011, the board entered a final opinion and order in a case involving Mr. Reed. The board found Mr. Reed in violation of the board's regulations. The violations were for a violation of section 18 VAC 15-40-120.A for failure to ensure both parties signed a legible written contract clearly specifying the terms and conditions, limitations, and exclusions of the work to be performed. Section 18 VAC 15-40-190.6 for failing as a certificate holder in such a manner as to safeguard the interest of the public. Mr. Reed rendered an opinion regarding the condition of EIFS without the necessary qualifications and failed to identify in his report that the EIFS be evaluated by a qualified home inspector, and for violation of 18 VAC 15-40-190.2 for performing repairs as a result of the finding of his certified home inspection. The board imposed monetary penalties in that case involving, totaling $2,350, placed Reed's license on probation. As part of the probation or the condition of the probation, Mr. Reed was required to submit evidence acceptable to the board that he had completed a minimum of 8 hours continuing education pertaining to the EIFS within 6 months of the effective date of the order. Mr. Reed did successfully comply with the terms of that order on March 22nd, 2012.
Thank you, Joseph.
So, yes, sir.
I'll take a motion to accept the recommendations on sanctions. However, if you want to, you would have to amend the report to include to change it from 6 months to a year. Joseph, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, 6 months, from 6 months to 1 year to complete the continuing education.
And just to make sure everyone understands, when we divide the two so that priors aren't considered as part of whether or not there's a violation. You're only considering whether or not there's a violation on the basis of the record before you. When the information about the sanction or the priors are provided, that's a piece in the puzzle that can be considered as to whether or not the sanctions as provided in the recommendation, whether the board still agrees with those sanctions, because those are not a part of the consideration of the record as it's going through the adjudication process.
And just, so I'll entertain a motion to accept the penalties and be clear whether you want to amend them or not in the motion.
I move that we accept the sanctions, including the addition or the change from 6 months to 1 year.
I second that motion.
Any discussion? I would like to ask, if we're giving him from 6 months to a year in continuing education, is that thought about by the board because of the current situation and us having to get people through it under the COVID and all that? Or, I mean, it looks like every 10 years we might be seeing Mr. Reed, but you know, I mean,
My thought was because of the COVID. give him the extra time?
For clarification, actually the timeline that is being recommended being amended is because of a technicality of language in the statute that ties the probationary period or the education to probationary period. And so through the amendment, it makes sure that the period to take the education is consistent with the probationary period. So there's in the amended language, there would be the 6-month suspension followed by the 1-year probationary period, which will include the opportunity to complete the education. So, and I may have, that essentially, it's a technicality. It's not really because of COVID and those considerations.
Okay, thank you, Trish. Okay, call for the, any more discussion? Being none, call for the roll. Tricia, you're having a good time with this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sandra Baines.
Aye.
Mr. Craner is out. Galapa Madhusudan.
Yes.
Jean Magruder.
Yes.
Peter Palmer.
Yes.
David Rushton.
Yes.
Patrick Studley.
Aye.
And Lewis Walker.
Yes.
All right, and the motion passes with a majority vote.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last of the cases we have on our agenda for case files is a consent order that begins at page 529 of your agenda. The respondent in the case is Kenneth Joseph Dees, and the file number is 2020-2397. And Mr. Dees signed the consent order admitting to violations of the board's regulations. The 3 charges in the case. There are 3 charges in the case. The first of which is that the contract used by Mr. Dees in the transaction did not meet the minimum requirements of the board's regulation. The second count in the case is a violation for the home inspection report not meeting minimum requirements of the board's regulation. And then the last count in the case is a violation of the board's prohibited acts for having cited, stated, or represented that there exists a violation of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code in a home inspection report. The proposed agreement, Mr. Chairman, is for monetary penalties totaling $750 plus board costs in the amount of $150 for total penalties and costs of $900. And unlike the last cases, Mr. Chairman, since this is a consent order, we only need 1 vote to either accept or not accept the consent order that's presented.
I would entertain a motion to accept the consent order.
I make a motion that we accept the consent order.
In a second,
I second it. Dave?
any discussion? Being no discussion, Tricia will call the roll again.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Sandra Baines.
Aye.
Mr. Craner is recused. Galapa Madhusudan. Mr. Madhusudan?
Yes. Yes. I said yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Jean Magruder.
Yes.
Peter Palmer.
Yes.
David Rushton.
Yes.
Patrick Studley.
Aye.
And Lewis Walker.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes with a majority vote.
Thank you.
All right.
Next
Mr.
item.
Chairman, that concludes the cases, so Mr. Craner can come back now.
Did we cover Mr. Matthew Settler's case?
I believe we did. Sir. I believe that was the first case, and I think the board accepted the violations and the sanctions that were recommended in the IFF summary.
I think the first case was Mr. Tillman.
Mr. Tillman's case was pulled from the docket. That Mr. Tillman had retained an attorney, and so at the request of the attorney, the case was returned to give Mr. Tillman an opportunity to have an IFF conference with counsel present.
Understood.
Next item on the agenda, Tricia.
Yeah. So if
With Joe.
yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was waiting for wasn't sure if Mr. Crane would come back, so it looks like he's here. So the next item on the agenda is for our regulatory section of the meeting, and beginning at page 538 is the regulatory actions update. And we only have 2 ongoing actions at present, the first of which is the home inspector regulations general review that currently is in the notice of intended regulatory action stage. The board authorized the filing of the NOIRA document, or the NOIRA, and formation of a regulatory review committee back in August of last year. The committee has been formed. The committee has held meetings on November 10th and yesterday on February 3rd. The NOIRA was filed for executive branch review in November of 2020. It is still undergoing executive branch review. As I understand it, is with the Secretary of Commerce and Trade's office. The next step in that process would be that once the regulatory, or once the executive branch review is completed, NOIRA would be submitted for publication in Virginia Register and then would be open for a public comment period. In addition, Mr. Chairman, the Regulatory Review Committee is expected to have another meeting on March the 24th. The only other regulatory item we have at the moment is the lead-based paint renovation, repair, and painting program regulation, and that is still currently in the proposed stage. It was filed for executive branch review in April of 2014. It is still in executive branch review and is currently with the governor's office. Do any members have any questions regarding either of these items? Okay. Thank you. And then I think Tricia is going to give you an update on the Regulatory Review Committee meeting that was held yesterday.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll do a brief overview of the committee's work. Mr. Rushton is serving as chair of the committee, and then we also have Mr. Craner, Ms. Baines, and Mr. Studley on the board who are helping with the committee's work. And then we have a member of the home inspector community, the real estate community, and then a member of the board for contractors. So that's a kind of overview of the committee membership. As Joe mentioned, they did meet yesterday. We went through in detail the regulations pertaining to the definitions, the entry requirements, as well as the renewal and reinstatement requirements. One of the big things, as you all know, that has been, discussed in various mechanisms is related to the entry requirements and kind of how experience counts, what happens with folks from other states, and all of those different kinds of things. So as you can imagine, that was the bulk of the meeting yesterday. Staff presented 3 kind of general options for the board or for the committee to consider. And so I think when it comes to the board, it'll be a different concept than what we have now. But I think the discussions and everything puts it in a good place in terms of providing options to be able to enter the profession. The next meeting that we have scheduled, we are perfectly on track, is to go over the standards, which includes the provisions related to home inspection contracts, home inspection reports, as well as the standards of practice and conduct. So your prohibited acts and those types of things, we'll be going into those in detail. And then we'll also be going through the training provider approval processes that are currently in the regulations to do a thorough review of those regulations. I've been amazed at the amount of work that the committee has accomplished in such a short amount of time. Right now, we are slated to bring this to the board to consider the language at its May meeting. We have 1 committee meeting scheduled, as we mentioned. We have space for another one if we were to have to, depending on the progress at the next meeting. But if yesterday was any indication, I think we probably just have 1 meeting on the books that we'll need to have. That's an overview, but I would like Mr. Rushton, if there's anything to add or anything that I left out, please feel free to supplement all of that.
I have nothing to add because you covered absolutely everything and far more than I had in my notes if I was going to, make that summary. But no, there was excellent progress at the meeting yesterday. The Tricia's staff had prepared 3 options for the committee to consider in terms of possibilities for revamping actually expanding the entrance requirements to the industry. We had good discussion on all 3 options and wound up with ultimately 2 tables that provide choices. The choices in the experience were expanded, and I think it's going to wind up being much addressing the issues that have come up before the board again and again, where people feel that because they've been doing either building inspections, architects, engineers, and they've all been looking to become home inspectors and having to do the same sort of entry requirements as an 18-year-old out of high school. And most of them felt that they were slightly beyond those requirements. So the options presented were discussed, and it looks like the 3rd option is the one that's going to, with some changes, be adopted. And again, I wanted to thank Tricia and the staff, whoever worked to develop all those. The committee wound up, reviewing and making some changes, but the bulk of the work was done by Tricia's office. And thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I have one moment?
Sandra,
I just wanted to add that for the board's edification, that the staff had also done national research to see what other localities were doing to make sure that we were at the bell and not either lagging behind other states or leading the pack. So kudos to the staff for looking out and just kind of measuring where we as a state were in comparison to other states in the US. So kudos.
I'd also like to second that. The research that the staff did before the meeting was, unbelievably outstanding. We walked in and just were ready to do what we needed to do simply because the background, the research had all been done, organized, and presented to us before we set foot in the room.
thank you. Tricia?
I think it's because Tanya's tired feeding us and she wanted to make sure we had everything that we could just get right to it and get her done.
Well, I was going to say, I was thinking that maybe we keep Tanya like ordering those great lunches so that you all will say nice things. But no, thank you all so much. It's definitely a team effort. And, the committee, I think, has, taken so much time and has been so thoughtful about going through and kind of given us, the direction to be able to go and come back with hopefully something that's going to be helpful and meaningful in the discussion. So it's been a good meeting, and I think the regulatory process is not a fast one, so I don't expect these to be anytime soon. But I think it's going to be a good transition into continuing our progression through the licensing module, and hopefully help folks to be able to get into the profession as Mr. Rushton and Ms. Baines talked about.
Next item on the agenda, Tricia?
All right, Mr. Chairman, this is Joe Howitt. We'll the next item on the agenda is consider exempt actions to continue temporary fee extensions. And so just to sort of provide a brief background on this, a couple of years back, Mr. Chairman, the department's financial services director had advised us that it was necessary to temporarily reduce the renewal and late renewal fees for asbestos licenses and for lead licenses. And so the board in 2017 adopted a change to the sections of the regulations to reduce those renewal and late renewal fees. In 2019, at the consultation with the financial services director, the board extended those temporary fee reductions, but at a slightly higher amount. So not quite to return to the level of the fees that are sort of currently in regulation or the default in regulation, but a reduction, still a reduction. The financial services director has advised us again that we should continue, or that the board should continue the extension of the temporary fee reduction for renewal and late renewal fees for both asbestos and lead licenses. And so what we have before you are proposed changes to those sections in the regulation to extend the temporary reduction. The level of the fees would actually revert back to what they were, or the fee schedule will revert back to what it was for the period covering 2018 to 2020 for licenses expiring February 1st, before February 1st, 2020. So we're gonna have two actions to get the board's vote on. The first begins at page 542 of your agenda. That's the current late renewal fees in the regulation for asbestos. And then following that, as you see displayed on your screen are the proposed changes to extend the temporary fee reduction through February of 2023, or up to February of 2023. Do anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
So the first motion would be
For clarification, it can be all done in one motion.
Okay.
okay.
So we would need the board to vote on an exempt action to for changes to both of the regulations.
Is there a motion from the board?
So moved, Dave.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Being no discussion, Tricia?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, roll call vote. Sandra Baines,
Aye.
John Craner,
Yes.
Galapa Producerin,
Yes.
Dean Magruder,
Yes.
Peter Palmer,
Aye.
David Rushton,
Yes.
Patrick Studley,
Aye.
and Lewis Walker.
Yes.
Thank you very much. The motion passes with a majority vote.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda?
And Mr. Chairman, if I can really quickly, I have it up on the screen. Because of the timing with the temporary fees, we kind of ran into a little bit of a technical glitch where there was going to be a month or so time period where the fees were going to go up and then they were going to go back down for a variety of reasons that would be difficult for licensees to understand why this month they're charged this amount and next month they're charged that amount. And so we were fortunate in that the current emergency declaration that we are under, as you know, authorizes the director to waive certain regulations. And so we were fortunate to be able to work with the director, and she, immediately was able to issue a waiver so that we didn't have that up and down kind of, quirk in the fees. And so we were able to keep those stable. And so until we get the exempt action in effect, we do have this waiver that covers us to make sure we're maintaining the fees and not confusing all of our licensees.
Yeah, that would have been a pain. update on lead training, I think.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Despite everything going on with COVID and all the different things that we're doing, we did receive some training course audits or training course applications for some new lead training programs, which necessitated us going out to do audits. Specifically, the John Tyler Community College, through their Community College Workforce Alliance, is working in partnership with the Department of Housing and Community Development under a new grant that they have to train lead workers, lead supervisors, inspectors, and risk assessors. And so we did do an audit of the initial courses for inspector and risk assessor. Tanya, thankfully, was able to go out and take care of one of those audits, and hers was much more exciting than mine was in terms of some extracurricular things that went on during the meet. Mine did not include any kind of ambulances and that type of thing as Tanya did. We'll save that for another day. But we do have 2 more audits coming up for 2 more programs that they submitted, and thankfully Tanya is going to be doing those as well. And so those are for, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tanya, worker and supervisor initial?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so those will be coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Next item on the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the agenda, first, I apologize for not getting this out to you all sooner. Tanya sent via email yesterday evening a memorandum that we prepared to ask you all to consider an issue that's coming up because of the waivers that are in place related to asbestos training courses. I have it up on the screen, but obviously reading through all of that, so I'll give you a brief overview. What we have for asbestos refresher courses, there is not a hands-on component, and so those for several years have been given various delivery methods, which includes online training and those types of things. Again, without the hands-on component, that hasn't been an issue. In fact, in 2007, EPA issued specific guidance for those refresher courses that are being offered via online with some, recommendations for states. When the emergency order went into effect, as you know, there were several waivers issued, and one specifically was to waive any prohibitions or restrictions on online or distance learning. That would not include any statutory provisions. It would only include regulatory provisions. For the asbestos training program, all of the criteria for those programs, other than the language in the statute that says the board shall have regulations to approve these programs, it's all contained in the regulations. The regulations point to the model accreditation plan, which is EPA's model language that's used by states. But that's in the regulations. There's nothing in the statute that refers to EPA or us following EPA when it comes to asbestos training programs. So what we've seen come up since the waivers have gone into effect to address some of the issues that are going on with COVID and social distancing and not promoting gatherings is these hybrid courses for initial trainings. So what's happening is for the instructional part, so the theoretical part, i.e. the classroom sections, are being conducted virtually. So all of that piece of it is conducted virtually. The hands-on part is being conducted in person. So I'll get to, in the regulations, you'll see the breakdown. Almost all of them for the initial training have some piece of it that has to be hands-on. We've only had 1 or 2 providers that have reached out to us to employ this method of training delivery. And we've accepted the submittals. What we've done informally at this point is to say, when you provide notice, you have to let us know if it's online, and if it's in person, which means if you have these hybrid courses, you're actually listing it twice, one course twice, one for the online to let us know when that's happening, and one for the in-person to let us know when that's occurring and where that's occurring so that we can still conduct an audit. With all of that being said, one of the things that we've realized just as we are in this waiver period, we would like to be able to provide some more clear guidance and instruction to our training providers. And so one of the things that we're asking the board to consider is this request for guidance, which lays out some of the procedural steps that we would be able to convey to training providers who are utilizing this during this emergency period. So essentially it says, everything that you are required to follow in your normal course of delivery of these training courses in person, you're expected to still follow them in this hybrid environment. So whatever schedule you have, whatever instructors you have, all of that still has to be followed. Obviously, the exception would be hands-on training may be held a day or two later. Regardless of when it's held, the regulations say you need to have all of it done within a 2-week time period. So we would still ask that the training be maintained in that 2-week time period. We would also ask for access to the online portion. So we would ask that staff be provided with a unique log on and password so that we can access the training at any time to ensure that it's following all the regulatory requirements. We would also ask to follow what we've kind of been doing just in practice, that they be instructed to provide the notice to include 2 entries, one for the online portion and one for the hands-on portion, and that would also be duplicated on the participant list. We also would ask that the examination still be delivered in a secure manner, which the way we're framing it is not in an online environment. Not that there aren't ways to be able to establish some of those securities, but since this is kind of a temporary situation, we would be asking that they either do it through a proctor, a testing center, or in person at the conclusion of the hands-on training. And then as usual, we would ask for the disclaimer language that staff can always ask for additional information or determine that they haven't met the threshold in the board's policy to be able to offer the hybrid training. I know that was a whole lot, but I know just getting that at the last minute, I didn't want you all to not have had an opportunity to understand what staff was asking. Are there any questions that you have about this or any other feedback?
Yeah, Trish, just 2 things. So the hands-on person, do we have permission to go visualize that?
Yes. We can audit any part of it. And so that's why we would have, as part of the audit process, as part of the notification process, they have to let us know when and where that's taking place, so that if staff wanted to do an unannounced audit, we can show up there to do that for the hands-on portion.
We wouldn't be there to comment on the social distancing part of this, right? Hands-on takes 2 or 3 people sometimes.
I'm going to be looking, if I'm out doing the audit, at our regulatory provisions that they have to follow for offering the training. I'll kind of look to the director because other than letting VDH know, I'm not sure what our role would be in that.
Mr. Chairman, in fact, the governor's executive order gives DPOR as a regulatory agency with authority over several professions that interact with licensees that have a lot of interaction with COVID-related industry, authority to interface and enforce portions of the masking and social distancing orders. And so, for example, in the barbering and cosmetology communities, we've been partnering with VDH when necessary, and when we receive complaints, for example, in salons or spas, for failure to comply with masking orders. And so you raise a good point. We would not be able to unsee something like that, and would work with VDH to ensure compliance is necessary.
Yeah, because when you're doing hands-on, I mean, we wear respirators in the 4-day, you know, but you're building tents and all that, and you're going to be working very close with other people on the hands-on. So, one other thing, Tricia, I mean, I've never experienced it, but the split, you're allowing them to, I don't know if it's always been our practice, say on a 4-day asbestos training, you're allowing them to do online as long as they get their hands on within 2-week period. You're splitting it.
Again, we have only had the request through one training provider. We're actually working on another situation where we've heard from another state that another provider has employed this, but we've got to get more details because we didn't know about that one. So yes, in terms of ensuring that we've gone through to look at the language that's in the guidance that's been offered by EPA, even though again, it's not in our statutory framework, you know, that we have to comply with that. The sole reason that they don't accept it, EPA does not have it in their guidelines to accept it for initial training, is because of the hands-on portion. And I guess they, at the time in 2007, didn't propose a way to be able to bifurcate the training, so to speak, to have the online dedicated to that instructional piece, but then still require the in-person for the hands-on.
But they can do hands-on. They can do hands-on 8 days later, right?
Yes, our regulations just require that you complete that course within a 2-week period.
Oh.
Tricia, I just want to add your training material. I hope it is covering more in detail about the safety items, because I do see sometimes the home inspector misses some safety items, which might compromise not just human lives too. It's a safety issue. So I hope they go more in detail in their training material about that. And also the penalties that you guys have should not be generalized for all the, as same. If the kind of mistakes they make is pretty costly, which means costing human lives, like one of them had like a missed load-bearing wall, for example. Either is not knowledgeable or is it not trained well. So those are the things I think they should pay more attention to probably in the training material as well. Can spending more time when it comes to safety items. That's just my thought.
And this wouldn't change any of the regulatory requirements that asbestos training providers have to follow in terms of the specifics that's in the criteria. That's all laid out in the regulations and certainly includes a lot of things related to safety. Obviously, when you're talking about asbestos abatement, that's a central part of the training.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, so I kind of wish Paul was here today because I know this has been a topic that he's brought up a couple of times and concerns about the hands-on aspects and being able to form some sort of possibly hybrid aspect that would be accepted. But in the guidance, which I thought was thorough and outlined the particular aspects of what needed to be accessible for the board, the department rather. But in there, you mentioned that we have to, we would need to submit something to the department so that they can log on to the online portion as well. Maybe a stipulation in that guidance as to where, what they need to send it to, or email or something specific to that.
Trish?
Thank you, Mr. Studley. No, what our plan would be, again, once we have direction from the board through this discussion, and if the board so chooses adoption of a policy, our plan would be to prepare a mailing to our training providers, laying out all of those specifics so that we're ensuring it's being handled consistently. You know, I also, as we were working on this, I felt terrible that Mr. Thomas is not here, because I know that this has been a big topic that he's been concerned about, and certainly he's provided some valuable feedback in that. So definitely, but we are seeing it, so we didn't want to delay and having the board kind of give us some direction to make sure that we're proceeding appropriately.
Would this be an ongoing policy after the emergency, as far as, or would we fall back to how we used to be?
So, Mr. Chairman, right now it's focused on the time period for the waiver. With that being said, in looking through, I don't see a prohibition if this were to become permanent. The kind of cautionary note that I'm exploring, we actually have a meeting next week, is the implications for other states. Whenever we approve asbestos training, it's approved by EPA, so to speak, which means the other EPA authorized states also accept that training. There could be implications in that states that strictly prohibit online training will choose not to accept training that Virginia has approved, which is why at this time we're limiting it to the waiver. But again, I don't see anything in our regulations that really gives any kind of direction on the method of delivery.
But wouldn't this be OSHA instead of EPA? Or
EPA.
The training? I was just getting, because if we all get the vaccine, you know, we could be over this in June, July, and then all of a sudden you're giving out notices on new policy and it might be taken away, you know. But we'll see. So what do you need from the board?
So the summary that we've asked for is included in the memo that we distributed, and I have as best I can on the screen. If the board agrees and would like us to move forward with that, we would need a motion to adopt that policy as a guidance document. The one question I do have, and I'm glad you asked the question about the interaction with the current COVID safety measures, and because that gave me some information that I haven't been clued into just because I haven't had to deal with it in terms of our interaction, is whether or not, and this, not to put you on the spot at all, Mary, is should we incorporate any of that into the guidance, or do you think we're covered by what's already in the existing orders?
Mr. Chairman, to answer the executive director, I think this guidance is appropriately limited to this board's regulation and authority, and in implementation, the department would address any of those other enforcement issues. Tricia, you also may want, I'm sure you already plan to address the effective date issue with regard to guidance documents going out for publication.
Yes, thank you. The new process, I'm going to say new, but we're probably a couple of years into it, for guidance documents. Once the board adopts it, we put it on town hall, like we did with all our regulations, minutes, all of that, in order to have it published for a public comment period. So we will get public comments for, I believe it's 30 days. At the conclusion of that comment period, is so long as the comments aren't about or don't challenge whether or not we can even do what we're trying to do through a guidance document, that guidance would become effective. So there's kind of inherently going to be a little bit of lag time in terms of when it would actually become effective. In preparing, if the board chooses to adopt this, that's going to give us time to start getting the word out and getting the details worked out with the training providers to ensure that we're being consistent once it is in place. And if it does become permanent, it will help us, you know, to navigate all of that and ensure that we've got all the issues worked out.
So any other discussion? If not, needed a motion to move on the request for guidance document.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the ALHI board accept the board's or the staff's recommendations for hybrid training as it relates to the initial asbestos training courses. That would include the online and the person-to-person training within that 2-week period.
I second the motion.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, Tricia, call for the roll.
Sandra Baines,
Aye.
John Craner,
Yes.
Galapa Madusadan,
Yes.
Jean Magruder,
Yes.
Peter Palmer,
Yes.
David Rushton,
Yes.
Patrick Studley,
Aye.
and Lewis Walker.
Yes.
And the motion passes with a majority vote. Thank you all so much for that discussion. It's very helpful to us.
Next item on the agenda.
All right. Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to give the board an update on recent development in terms of partnering with Virginia Department of Health. Their Office of Radiological Health reached out to us to ask how we might be able to help get the word out, especially to home inspectors, that there are certification requirements through VDH for radon professionals. It's a relatively new legislation. I'm sorry to scroll through. I'm trying to find where I put it. Anyway, it's a relatively new regulation that does require certification through Virginia Department of Health. One of the things they found, because they do have the ability to look into complaints where someone doesn't have the certification to do that type of work, one of the things they found is that there are a lot of home inspectors who don't know that in addition to needing to be licensed as a home inspector, if they're branching out into that specific type of work, then they need to have that certification through VDH. Sorry, I'm trying to get to. After
I'd like to comment on that if I could, please. Dave?
Well, Tricia, let Tricia finish, then you can comment. How's that?
Fine.
And so they reached out to us to ask, you know, was there anything we could do to help get the word out? Obviously, like all agencies, we have to keep in mind budgetary constraints, so we can't, you know, we're limited in what we can do, but we worked with them and determined that for us to include an insert with our new licenses, and I have that here on the screen, that just lets them know, it points them to that office. Board staff does not have a role in educating or anything beyond just letting folks know, if you're going to be doing this, to go to the Office of Radiological Health. In addition, that office prepared a bulletin for us to include with those mailings that we're already doing. It's not a special mailing. It's just to go out with new licenses. That is just a brief overview, but again, points them to that office in order to be able to get more information. And so we're taking it as a purely, you know, assisting and providing information and direction. But again, board staff does not have the knowledge or expertise to be able to go any further than that in providing this information to our home inspectors. Not to say there aren't other folks that are doing this, but this is the one that falls within our domain.
David.
Yes. I am a licensed home inspector and have been doing radon testing. I do receive regular communication from Ryan Paris who is in charge of the radon program at the Virginia Department of Health. And as a home inspector, I have had none of this sent to me, and I do pay attention to any email I receive from Mr. Paris. So it's news to me. I knew that we were required to be certified outside of VDH and in order to do radon testing, but I don't recall any communication to me that now VDH, I was required to provide any documentation or anything to VDH about my certifications, other than you're required to provide a report of all your radon testing in the state to VDH. Again, that's been the source of my communications with Mr. Paris, but I haven't seen anything out of them regarding certification through VDH. John, do you have anything, John Craner?
John?
No, I've not heard of it, but I don't do radon testing.
I do radon testing, and I
Trish,
haven't received anything.
is there any way we
Sandra.
can share?
Patrick was.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I can't
Go
hear. My
ahead, Patrick.
apologies.
So yeah, I do radon testing out there, and as Dave was saying, it's now specified that, and there's nothing, as far as I know, that we have to send to the Department of Health. There is just a regulation saying, and that changed a year or so ago, roundabout, where before, the state recommended individuals be radon qualified, and now they stipulate that you must be radon qualified to do this, and that's at the federal level. But to my knowledge, there isn't anything that we have to submit. It's essentially just a regulation out there saying, hey, you've got to be a certified individual. I think at some point licensure or submittal certificates would be good, but at this point I don't think we're there. But I haven't received any notification like this either, so I think that would be good for radon professionals to know. But secondarily, Trish, you'd mentioned that this was just going to be sent out to new applicants. I would suggest maybe additionally sending it to renewal applicants as well, to bring them into the know about this, relatively new requirement. Because even when I sent in my new my refreshment of my certificate, I had to send back a new form, because on the new form, Virginia was now a box in there to check about being part of a state that requires certification. So I even had to resend my form in that aspect. So it was even news to me. It wasn't something that was really dictated about the additional requirement out there.
Sandra, did you have a oh, Trish? Sandra.
Sandra's welcome to, I'll let her fill in.
What I was wondering is if there's any way we can share our mailing list or the email addresses of our licensed home inspectors with the Department of Health and let them send out notices.
Trisha?
Yes, thank you. That's the exact direction I was going when in working with Mr. Paris on kind of options, and we went through a whole gamut of potential ideas. Before we land on this.
Hold on, Trisha.
There we go.
Go ahead, Trisha, hopefully.
So we did offer to provide our list of licensees, which includes, it doesn't necessarily include email addresses, but includes mailing addresses, with the understanding that, again, they have budgetary constraints as well. And so I know he was exploring whether or not that was something that they would be able to do. We did not do it because, one, it's not our certification. And so as we put on the notice that we're sending with the new licenses, it's very much kind of disclaimer-ish in that there may be others. that I don't know. This is just the office that contacted us to help us get the word out. And I don't want to put the board in the position of being the authority of all types of certifications and licenses and all of that that you would need to have to do the work that you do. So we're trying to navigate a line to be helpful and provide the information, but we don't want to put ourselves in a situation of too overwhelming staff with phone calls about a radon certification program that we don't know, which then goes into, well, what certification do I need to have for pest control? What certification do I, it's certainly something we can explore as to whether or not it would be feasible to do it at least for a limited time period for renewals. But it also sounds like we have been asked to focus on home inspectors, but Mr. Studley, based on your feedback, it sounds like maybe it's even broader than that, with, is it prevalent among professionals in the asbestos and lead industries?
You mean as far as radon?
Right.
I have had other industries in relation to asbestos or lead, other companies, and usually those companies will know enough to research into and say, hold on, let me see if we can even do that. Some will just go ahead and do those aspects, but usually those companies know that they should check into these things first, because we focus a lot on liability aspects in our courses. So I've gotten contacted by other companies that do lead and asbestos, or even mold, which is not regulated, but and because they'll type in and see who can do radon and find out, oh, Mr. Studley's a radon professional, you should contact this company to go ahead and see about getting this done. So I generally see professional asbestos and lead companies researching and then referring if needed, but I've got a couple of home inspectors that will reach out to me, but I'm sure there's a lot more out there that don't even realize the requirement. And I would say the biggest aspects for radon testing, because in schools it's required, but otherwise it's residential, and it's often a common concern in purchasing a house. So that's likely where it aligns with the home inspector, because that's always going to be a part of a real estate purchase. So I know in the home inspector regs, it does mention that they should have enough knowledge about radon testing, but I noticed a guidance document such as this that says, hey, not only should you be aware of the possibility of doing this test, it requires a specific professional.
Tricia?
That's helpful. So one of the things that I will be providing Mr. Paris with the feedback from this discussion, and again offering the opportunity to that we'll provide our regular list, so that if they want to pursue doing a mailing, we'll facilitate that however we can. I can explore whether or not it would be something that we could put in as an informational thing on the website for home inspectors, with the disclaimer or caveat or whatever the right term is, that this is not all inclusive of things you might need to know. Again, that's the fine line we're trying to navigate and trying to decide where our role is in helping, get the information out. But definitely it's something that, staff can look further into to see where those lines might be. But then I'll also reach out to Mr. Paris to let him know that this was definitely something of interest to the board, and the concern, for lack of a better word, of making sure that that word is being disseminated to those that it may be affecting.
Thank you. Next
I
item.
have a comment.
Comment?
Dave? Yeah, my opinion is that it's completely above and beyond DPOR's responsibility, but that is apparent.
That is a
that
question,
is
Mr.
how
Chair.
DPOR takes their job, is not just doing what is necessary, but anything that they can to help and assist, even in areas that are completely voluntary. And again, I thank Tricia and the entire staff for doing so. Again, this has brought something to my attention through my home inspector's license that through the radon setup in the state, there was no information whatsoever given to me.
Tricia.
Well, thank you, Dave, very much for that. And again, we try to be a helpful resource, but certainly try not to go further than would be appropriate for us.
Next item.
Can I ask one question before we go to the next item, sir?
Yes, Ms. Banks.
When you need to have a radon test done, does the individual have to get a special permit for those types of testing? Okay.
Any?
Thank you.
Did you get an answer? I did.
Mr. Studley said
I
no.
saw some heads shaking.
That it doesn't it doesn't require a permit, but we have to have a qualifying certificate. We have to be accredited. But just to place the test, anybody can order a test.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Tricia, next item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I won't go into a great bit of detail. As you know from our last meetings, we do have several waivers in place in addition to the two we talked about today. That ensures that the ALHI temporary fees are in place until we get the exempt action in effect, but also we have the waivers related to online training. We also have waivers that extends the validity of licenses through 30 days past the end of the public health emergency declaration, and then also extends exam eligibility deadlines during that time period as well. There has been an additional guidance document that doesn't affect our programs per se, but there are certain regulations in the agency that require the regulant to have a physical presence in the place of business. Obviously, with teleworking and you know all of the remote things that are happening, we don't want to be in a position of forcing people to be physically located in a place. So those are being waived right now as well. And so as things come up, the director is continuing to monitor where we may need to take some kind of action to temporarily waive those regulations that, you know, could serve as an impediment in complying with all the social distancing and gathering requirements under the governor's orders. The only other thing that I want to mention is staff is continuing with our reduced call center hours. We are currently covering our call centers from 8:30 to 1 o'clock. We have continued to explore efforts to do as much remote work as possible, which was out of the question, I think, a year ago, but you know, look at how much we've all done in a year. So we continue to do that. Our call centers are now off-site, so people are able to handle those when working from home. And we'll continue exploring those. But again, email, all of that is answered all day long. The only thing that's limited is the call centers, which is 8:30 to 1 o'clock.
Next item, financial statement.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have for you, as always, the financial statements for the last period, just to provide you with for informational purposes.
Thank you. 2021 legislative update. Nothing, right?
So, well, our director may disagree, but my year has been very quiet.
Yeah, this board. I
Yes.
do know on the board of contractors, we got elevator license coming up. I know that, but I haven't seen anything concerning our board.
Yes, no, and I just wanted to go over a couple of things just to put them on your radar that the agency is monitoring. They're not really within the programs of the board, but certainly, could be impactful if they affect the agency and that type of thing. The first one I want to mention is HB 2259. This one actually was tabled this week, but it would have allowed anyone who's had their license denied by a regulatory board, i.e., for example, the ALHI board, could ask the governor to authorize that license or that application. But again, that was tabled, I believe, just this week.
I'm gonna have to talk to Mr. Scott about that one.
Mr. Chairman, please do. In all seriousness, if I may,
that made no sense.
It's a particularly ill-conceived bill. The substitute presented changed it to petitioning the governor to reinstate a license revoked by a regulatory board. And Delegate Scott presented it as a social justice measure, as a from a perspective of the idea that there are applicants and licensees being revoked because they don't have the right connections. And so the idea, just coming from a perspective that's quite frankly so misinformed as to what our boards do and how they do it and the process in place.
Well, no board, and I serve on two, no board I know, we're more intimately involved in these cases than what the governor ever could be, as far as knowing the individuals and their records and all that. So it would just be added duty, and I don't see where it would help anything.
Yes. So, it was. I will say I was very encouraged that some of the members of the committee, Barry Knight and Delegate Simon in particular, raised very good points about how due process is built into it, and that members who serve on these boards do an exceptional job at taking up everything on a case-by-case basis. So that was very encouraging. But yeah, the bill itself was troubling.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll talk to Mr. Scott about the direction he was going on it. So yeah. Trish, the good bill.
So the next bill that I just wanted to let you know about is HB 2321. Within the last year, forgive me, I don't remember exactly when it occurred, DPOR was placed under the Chief Workforce Development Advisor, who works under the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, along with Virginia Employment Commission. This bill would actually create a new secretary, so the Secretary of Labor, and the last I saw, the language would make that position of Chief Workforce Development Advisor would be the Secretary of Labor, and it would put DPOR, Virginia Employment Commission, and Department of Labor and Industry under that Secretary's umbrella. So again, we're monitoring it, and all of that, but just putting it here for informational purposes.
To my understanding, it's either on third reading today or it's passed, or
it's been reported out of
committee.
Regular committee and House Appropriations, and so it'll be on the House floor today.
For first reading.
Or tomorrow. Yeah. Well,
Thank
it has
you.
to be today or tomorrow.
Right. What's all got to be done? Go ahead, Trish.
No, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say everything up there has to be done by tomorrow. Also, so.
The next couple of bills, not surprisingly, as a result of the pandemic, we've all explored this virtual meeting environment. And, there have been some things that are in existing law that did somewhat impede our ability to have virtual meetings fully. We've been able to work with those. There was some language put in the budget bill last year, and quite frankly, a pandemic makes you work a lot of things out that you otherwise might not have been able to. But there are a couple of bills that are being put in to directly address some of those hindrances related to electronic meetings. And so there's HB 1931, is one of the bills that gets into a member being unable to attend a meeting. And then SB 1271 also gets into electronic meetings related more to these emergency situations. These are both still alive and going through the process. The other one that I just going to briefly touch on, not really related to electronic meetings, but would affect boards, but it was tabled, is HB 1997. It would have changed the definition of what constitutes a meeting. As you all know, because, you know, staff lectures you all the time to not talk to one another because we don't want it to accidentally become a meeting where board business is being discussed. And then, you know, we've got to put your notice on town hall and all of those types of things. This would have expanded the number that constitutes a meeting. But again, this one was tabled. So continue not talking to one another, talk to us. The other two are just some studies that I wanted to mention. This one was also tabled, and I only watch from the sidelines because when it deals with one of my colleagues, in this case, the executive director of the board for contractors, I get to sit back and just watch what they do.
That was cold, Trish. Go ahead.
So this one would, and of course, our director doesn't look at it the same way because she has to deal with all of it. But this one would have created a study to look into occupational licensing laws, specifically related to construction trades and that type of thing. But it did not go forward. I admit I read it once in the beginning. So if Director Rose Vaughn has something to add to it, she would be much more up to date.
It's been referred by letter to the department to study.
Oh.
So while it is no longer a joint legislative subcommittee, which is fine, the agency and the board for contractors, Mr. Magruder, will be taking up this study.
See, I did doze off on that, but now I get to sit back and watch my colleague with the board for contractors.
So this wasn't actually just tabled. It attached the study.
It's still alive.
No, not for this year, it ain't. But
the work is alive for us.
Right. And then finally, this one was actually directed for Department of Labor and Industry to study the need for apprenticeship training programs. We have a number of professions and occupations here that are actively involved in apprenticeship training programs, not so much with the programs that I work with, but it's something that I certainly hear about in various ways related to our occupations and professions that we regulate and opportunities for people coming into the profession, which often, you know, will preempt the discussion of apprenticeships. So that was just one that, again, I was watching, but not really directly affecting our programs.
Mr. Chairman, just one more I might mention, because it's once been part of this board for a year. There is a bill that's already passed the House that will add to the residential property disclosure statement, which is really a disclaimer, as you know, a reference to mold assessment again, advising potential purchasers that they may wish to exercise their due diligence in obtaining a mold assessment by a business that follows EPA guidelines. And so since the legislature has, you know, at one time licensed mold remediation and then, of course, deregulated it, that's of some interest.
Thank you. So that's it on the legislative side?
Yes, short session with severe bill limits.
Hey, I've been working them twice a week, so. Next, outreach update.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things to mention. One, of course, lead, for the lead program, EPA has a monthly meeting that, you know, to go over issues with the Region 3 states. So, of course, we attend that whenever we can. One of them is actually this morning, so needless to say, we are not attending it. The other meeting that we have coming up is less frequently. They try to have it annually. It used to be in person. Obviously, it's not right now. Is with MERIC, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Environmental Consortium. Don't quote me on that. But essentially, it's a regional group that gets together to talk about issues dealing with asbestos, including those reciprocity type issues and things that we can do. There is an agreement from like the 1990s that Virginia was a part of that recognized different training and regulatory provisions between those. It has been in the process of being amended for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. There is a meeting next week. It's a 2-day meeting that they will again be discussing various asbestos related issues impacting our regional states, but in particular, continuing to work on that agreement between the Region 3 states. I'm unfortunately not able to attend, but fortunately, Tanya and Lisa Robinson, our licensing operations administrator, who certainly have probably way more to offer than I do anyway, as it relates to licensing and some of those types of issues. They will be attending, representing Virginia to be able to, weigh in on those agreements and our requirements and that type of thing.
Okay. Any other business?
The only thing I wanted to mention, if I may, and she might have disappeared because she might have known I was not going to put her on the spot. For our exams, Shannon Webster, who is our exams director, and her group have been hard at work through the whole COVID thing to resolve issues related to the exams and call centers and all of that. It's not as big as an impact, I don't think, just because of the much lower volume of examinees that we have for the lead program. But I will, if Shannon has some things to offer or provide, want to make sure to give her that opportunity if it's all right with the board.
Is she?
I'm still here. Yeah. Thank you, Trisha. I just wanted to let everyone know that we are receiving information from PSI when someone at the test site has tested positive. So this is where we are now. So we have received the emails. Once I do receive the information with the rosters, I do pass it on to Trisha and also the director so she knows. If anyone has any questions regarding that, please feel free to contact us. We are doing the best we can. We are ensuring that everyone is doing their diligence with being socially distanced, wearing masks, having hand sanitizer available, and doing all the cleanings that are required. We are still conducting exams. Everything has been moving forward. If there's any questions again, or if there's any situations that come up that you have any concerns with, please feel free to contact Trisha or myself, and I will get them resolved as soon as I can. But as far as everything going with exams, we're moving forward. And if you have any questions or need anything, just let me know. I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Webb.
So it's good to know that you guys are doing external tracing outside of the testing source. And I will say that I have had one person apply for and successfully take the exam, and another individual signed up for, and it is significantly easier and smoother than it has been in the past. So our new system that has been hammered out by the department side there has worked out much better than what we had in the past.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Any other business?
That is all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Future meeting dates.
Yes, our next meeting is May 13th. We'll see whether it's in person or virtual. I would say as long as we are in the scenarios where we are now, we'll likely maintain it as a virtual meeting, but I'll certainly communicate that as we know and kind of evaluate things on an ongoing basis.
As y'all know, you probably already got 2 texts from Tanya Pettis, or 2 emails about filling out your conflict of interest forms. Oh, I got 2, but. And how did we do on the conflict? I mean, the financial statements. Did everybody meet the deadline? Good?
Yeah.
Yes, you all did great. Thank you.
And before we adjourn, I would like to, I think we ought to have a motion that the board pay instead of our travel expenses. They might pay our internet bill. Not a valid motion, is it?
Or at very least send us lunch.
Yeah. Hopefully anybody got their shot, by the way. I know Trisha, she informed me like she's in the Z group. But if you get the chance, please
My
take
husband
the
and
shot.
I got our shots last week.
Oh, ain't you fancy?
I do what I can.
Yeah.
I was fortunately able to get mine.
And I will tell you, my husband had absolutely no reaction. I think the only reaction I had was I was a little tired. And I don't even know if that was psychological, just getting all worked up behind getting it, or a real reaction, but everything went fine.
Well, I'm glad
Now,
to hear
next week, if you all see me and I'm doing this, you'll know.
Well, I appreciate everybody being on the call, and with that, everybody have a good day. And if you get an opportunity to get the shot, and I'm still waiting, but anyway, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Dave.
Second. All in favor?
I second it.
Have a good day.
You too. Happy New Year, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate
Thank
everything.
you. Bye. Thank you very much.
Take care, y'all.
Bye, Tanya.